The Graphic Histories Podcast.
I got bit by a radioactive bug. I tried an experimental drug. Went up for a stroll on a gamma testing range. I found an enchanted hurricane. I made a serum that made me small. I modified the serum so it would make me tall. Radioactive isotope in my eyes. Dying alien helped me accessorize. I gained the proportion and strength of a spider. Now I'm invincible and I can fly. I lost my sight, my other senses were heightened. I'm gonna put on my pajamas and go fight crime.
Hey there, and welcome to the Graphic Histories Podcast. My name is Andre Mayette. I am your podcast host. Big thanks to Ukla Mock for our theme song, Superpowers, and big thanks to you, gentle listener, for tuning in to the show. Today we have a Titanic episode for you. One of the more high-profile people in the comics industry I've had on the show. I've had quite a few, but just another one to add to their ranks. A man that I've always admired his work, as far as what he's brought to the industry, as far as his actual art, as far as his writing, as far as everything he's done. And that man is Erik Larsen. I first came onto the scene noticing Erik's work when he was working on Spider-Man, Amazing Spider-Man, specifically after Todd McFarlane left, in which he did that really cool Revenge, a Return of the Sinister Six storyline that brought in Gog and had, a really evil Dr. Octopus at its center. I mean, he did the iconic Spider-Man issues that came with Venom after his introduction, in which we see, that iconic cover with the holding the Spider-Man skull with the Spider-Man mask all ripped over it. We chat about that. A lot of things, actually, his sort of influence on Venom's design, all the work he's done for all the other companies, and then eventually, what happened with Image and working with the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and all kinds of cool stuff. Really cool guy, great with his great stories, also very cool with his time. And just a really pleasant chat. It's always cool when you get to meet some of these people, that are heroes of yours, when you get to chat with them on a regular kind of way and just get to know them and realize that they're just, cool artistic types like you and I, maybe, if you're an artistic type. And just, that they're human and that they're cool folks. It's always refreshing. They tell you not to meet your heroes, but sometimes when you do, it works out. So luckily enough for me, it has, and most times I've talked on this show. So it's been great. We have moved things around a little bit, which you may have noticed by now. I have mentioned in the past that I was going to kind of streamline the show, get rid of those old episodes in which I didn't talk with people, in which I talked about comic book characters. I've streamlined it straight into just being interviews, revised the numbering based on that, and overhauled the website. So I've done all that. It's all done. It's pretty cool now. I'm also set up on one of those sites, Sprout, which sort of makes things easier when it comes to getting these episodes online and getting them in everywhere that podcasts are, as well as marketing them a little better and stuff like that. So it's been going well. Hopefully it, is a little bit of a thrust to move things to the next level. We'll see. I mean, this is a labor of love, and I do deeply enjoy doing it. We have a great number of listeners, but could always use more. So if you're a fan of what you're hearing, if you're new to the show, or if you haven't already, like, subscribe, follow us on the socials, and just tell someone about it. Other people that are into comic stuff, nerdy stuff, sci-fi, fantasy, talking to creators, writers, artists. Let them know. Pass it around, and let me know what you think of the show. I mean, I'm always ready for any kind of comments you have, even if they're negative. I don't mind getting into a little scrap here and there, so send them my way. But anyway, in the meantime, things are going well. I'm very excited about the direction of the show, where it's going, and a lot of that has been thanks to a friend of mine, Davin Skellhorn, who is our producer, who helps acquire a lot of the guests. He didn't this time. This was just my own gumption, reaching out to Mr. Larsen, and he was gracious enough to answer, and it worked out. So very excited to have him on the show, and very excited to talk with him. So let's just get right into it. Let's talk with comics legend and creator of the Savage Dragon, Erik Larsen. Hey, there he is.
There we go. Jeez.
Technology, huh?
The thing is I'm on a Mac, so
Ah,
I I usually would use Safari, but Safari doesn't connect with Zoom or whatever.
Uh,
It's just ordeal. I need to get on a different browser.
oh, geez. I'm sorry I had to make you go through all that.
It is what it is.
Well, thanks for joining me, Eric.
All right.
Awesome.
Well,
Hey. So, where are you? You're in Minneapolis, are you? Is that where
no,
you're
I'm
from?
in San Francisco, California.
Ah, right on. Okay. I knew it was somewhere. So the time difference is like 4 hours. So I was figured it was fairly significantly south if it was that big of a distance. So,
Yeah, it's clear the other coast.
no, yeah,
So
yeah.
if my wife or son come bursting in here during this, it's like, oh well, that's how
Oh,
that
fair enough. It's all good. It's all editable anyway. It's fine. Mine may as well. My vote, just a wife, but I don't know if she knows I'm doing this, so who knows? Um, cool. So yeah, thanks for being here. It's great having a chance to chat with you. Obviously, a big fan of your work, and yeah, this is surreal. So
All right.
so you grew up in Minneapolis, right? Minnesota?
I was born there and then I was there for 2 years maybe, and then we moved away.
Ah,
So
okay.
I have no memory whatsoever of Minneapolis other than I know I was born there.
So where were you? Where would you grow up at?
Bellingham, Washington, and in and around Mendocino, California.
Oh,
So
okay.
we were in the Bellingham kind of area up through fourth grade. Then we moved down to Mendocino, and I went to from fifth through 10th grade, and then we moved back up to Bellingham again. And then like that.
What did your folks do to make so much moving?
My father was kind of a ne'er-do-well.
Oh, even better.
he,
Was he like, all
he,
right? He's like, all right,
he,
pack up the car again. Daddy messed it
he
up.
was trying to figure out how to make a living and what to do. And he originally was a teacher. He taught drama at college and
Mhm.
stuff like that. That's kind of how I knew it coming in. And then later on, he was just doing any and everything he could to make ends meet. All right, man, you do you. Eventually, he was teaching workshops on how to make a living without having a job,
Oh.
which he had kind of perfected. Uh,
Wow. I didn't know you could come full circle with that. Like,
yeah.
yeah.
So at that point, he had gotten himself a printing press so that he could print up leaflets and stuff like that. Some of his early efforts at writing, I illustrated so that some of those early pamphlets, whatever that he was handing out, have some very early Erik Larsen art from, I don't know, I was 17, 18,
Really?
19 years old.
Wow.
And it was on that printing press that I printed Graphic Fantasy, which was the fanzine that me and a couple buddies did together.
Mhm.
And then that led to me getting some little bit of work here and there, and then eventually just working my way up to the food chain until I was at Marvel in DC.
When did you discover comics? Was your dad into them, or is it just something that you?
He was as a kid.
Yeah.
So we grew up with his collection that we just mauled. But it
That's the
was
way. It's
all this old stuff from the 40s and 50s, and he bought comics. He's a big fan of Captain Marvel, one, the Wiz comics or whatever,
Mhm.
the Fawcett Captain Marvel.
Yeah.
And he bought all those, and he was buying Mary Marvel and Marvel Family. He didn't get into Captain Marvel Jr. at all, so I didn't have any of those. Uh, and various other titles, a little bit of this and that, just depending on what it was. When EC Comics came around, he was all in on EC Comics
Nice.
and bought those up until the time that they stopped publishing.
Wow, that's cool.
And
That must have been a hell of a collection to inherit.
yeah,
You know.
it was while it lasted. My house burned down, so
Oh, shoot.
all gone.
Oh,
But
no.
at one point I had 90% of EC Comics
Oh,
output,
man. That's
uh,
amazing.
but no longer.
That's crazy. I recently my wife and I decided to take the jump and start watching all of the Tales from the Crypt TV show.
Oh
And
yeah,
I had a ton of those recreations because when I was a kid and that show came out, I was probably I don't know, like 7 or 8 or 9 or something. And I remember watching it when I shouldn't have, catching it on TV. My folks
yeah.
weren't around, and going back and watching it now because I have a bunch of those old EC collections and going through them. It's really surreal to see the episodes based on the comics that I remember reading.
Oh wow.
Like they're
Yeah,
the
I've never seen the show, so I have
oh
no idea
really yeah.
if they've adapted
Uh,
it.
there was one that always stuck with me as a kid. It was like this woman that killed her husband on Christmas Eve, and there's a story about this lunatic that was dressed up as Santa Claus that was killing women, and it all obviously doesn't work out for her in the end. But I remember like seeing like that story always kind of stuck with me as a kid, and then when we put in the DVD and watched the first episode, it was that episode, and it just like brought it all back. It was
Oh wow.
yeah, it was super cool. And it's like the horror comics had that effect, and it's really cool as a kid to to get that feeling again, even as an adult, and kind of remember that.
Yeah.
That's cool. So when did you start? Like, so were you drawing your own growing up, or is it something that came with
Yeah,
the
I
printing
was
press?
drawing when I was a real little kid.
Hmm.
So yeah, I think I was regularly drawing comics before I was regularly collecting comics.
Okay.
So I had managed to get copies of just a couple comics, an issue of The Incredible Hulk and an issue of Iron Man. So I just had a vague idea of
Hmm.
what they were. And then I knew my dad's comics. And then some friend had a used bookstore and they got in a pile of comics and I grabbed as many of those as I could. So there's a lot of 80-page giants from DC and
Nice.
stuff like that were in there. And then at some point I started getting regular. I think probably sixth, seventh grade.
Hmm.
It was when I was like, all right, I'm all in. I'm doing this.
The
But
switch was hit.
yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. So were your folks supportive of this? Like, obviously your dad had a non-conventional sort of career path. So was he accepting
Yeah,
of yours?
he was supportive of it. I think my mom was a little less so, just in that she would have preferred that I would have stuck with my education a little more to have a backup plan.
Mm.
And my dad was just kind of, no, let him do it. I was like, that's awesome for me, Dad, but mom's looking out for my best interest, I would hope. And
Yep. Maybe she's seen what the result of the no backup plan is, and
yeah,
firsthand.
being married to my dad.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, she's like,
That's
well,
how that
I don't
goes.
want to see history repeat itself here. Oh, cool.
Uh,
So, did you use the printing press to make your own comics as well when you got
yeah,
into
yeah,
that?
yeah, yeah,
That's
yeah, yeah.
awesome. Oh, the
But
fanzine,
so
right? You mentioned, yeah.
but that was way later. That was I was I that came about. I had who was it? Charlton Comics
Hmm.
was kind of on their way out, and they're going through their death throes, really, because they had no real regular new comics that were coming out, or if they did, there were very few.
Hmm.
They put out a book called Charlton Bullseye with the idea that we will just publish these comics and pay you no money, but you can retain the copyright, you can own the characters, whatever, and you'll get it in print, but you get zero money
And
because
anyone could
we don't
submit to
know.
this?
And so I was like, that sounds awesome. I want to have a book in print. So I drew up a dragon story
Uh,
with that in mind. Like, I'm going to get no money for this, but it's going to be in print and I'll own it. So that will be awesome. And then I submitted it, and they were like, "Yeah, it seems that even no money was too much money. This book didn't, it just wasn't successful. So we
Yeah.
had to cancel it. But they said submit it to Marvel and DC. Your work looks professional enough to
Uh,
do so. So I was encouraged by that. But I had this story that was sitting there done.
yeah.
And then I met a couple guys who kind of wanted to make their own comics, and I think I talked them into doing this thing together. So it's like, I've got a printing press, and you guys got want to make comics. I ended up helping them along quite a bit. I inked both of their stories,
No. So you basically
and
de
some
facto
cases,
editor in chief.
yeah. Well, I was redrawing their stuff too. I mean, I was super heavy-handed, and and they're older than me too. Why they would put up with this from this 19-year
Well,
old?
I mean, I'm sure you've met enough creative types to understand that they're not necessarily the most, focused sometimes on the
Yeah,
important business side of when it comes to what the art results in.
yeah. But I was the let's get shit done kind of
Hmm.
guy,
Yeah.
and so I was definitely a motor trying to get this thing going down the track.
And where did the dragon
Yeah.
idea come from? Is that something that just something that, or
Oh,
is it
he's a
something that's,
ripoff of Batman.
oh, really? The original
Yeah,
one?
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, my dad had these old comics, and I had these other ones, and there was these the Dick Sprang Batman where he had this big weird square
Oh,
jaw that
yeah.
looked always a little out of whack.
Yeah.
Somehow that stuck in my brain as, oh, that's cool. So I want to do a character like that. And so, I mean, the dragon was the same as Batman, pretty close. He
Hmm.
had a little hole where you could see that he was a Caucasian underneath,
Hmm.
and the whole green skin was a mask, and he had a cape, and he had a utility belt, and he had a super cool car. Which, I mean, about as cool as it could be when from a fifth grader. Uh, I don't think I draw cars any better now, is the sad thing.
Oh God. Yeah. Yeah.
But
Every time
yeah,
I
at
have
the
to draw
time,
one.
it's like, oh, this is gonna be awesome. Um, and I drew him like that for a while, and then eventually I got tired of drawing the stupid cape and all the other crap that came with it. So I decided I'll just I'll just make it the dude. And then I kept changing it. I couldn't decide what I wanted to do. So initially he was like Captain Marvel. He would say a magic word and turn into the dragon.
Oh, wow.
And then at some point I had these other stupid idiot characters too. And I had like a guy who was like my version of Captain Kirk. And then I had another dude who was a race car driver. And I'm like, I'm gonna pull all these guys together and have them be one dude. And then it's like, and then I decided to do something else entirely because it's like, oh, this Hulk guy's pretty cool. What if I have uh, a regular guy turn into the dragon? I'll have
Uh,
him just transform into the dragon. And I did that, and initially had the same personality, but still wore the mask, and then I pulled those guys apart and had them be like separate dudes because I had a wizard character who could do that. And that's where I finally got my green skin dragon guy. And
yeah.
then I just wrote and drew his adventures for 6 years as a little kid. And then, no more than that, 8 years. And
Wow.
then when I was 19, I had the story that I had submitted, and it was just kind of the culmination of everything that I had done as a kid. And so it was, let me pay off all this stuff. He's going up against the big bad guy, and then there's be the big payoff here. And that was my first imprint story.
Wow. You get to live like the ultimate dream of like a kid that's been drawing his character in his margins of his comic his entire life to actually get to bring it and
Yeah,
bring it to the end of its conclusion into a printed book in a real comic book. That's amazing.
that was it. But I was 19, and then I used that, and I eventually got in the business, and
Hmm.
then I was in the business doing stuff at every company that would have me. And then, 10 years later, we left Marvel and formed Image Comics.
Hmm.
And when I did Savage Dragon, I was like, all right, here's my idea. I'm going to do this guy. But in my head, I'm sitting there going, I have these two stories that I drew when I was a kid.
Hmm.
I'm going to write my comic. I'm going to start in a totally different place, and I'm going to work my way towards those two stories. And
Hmm.
I'm going to work those back into continuity. And then from that point, I can do anything. But that's my goal. So I had really that, okay, stay on target,
Yeah.
set up all the things you have to have in order for this to pay off. But it's like, some of the characters were super uh, derivative of other people's characters, and then some of them were absolutely not.
Hmm.
So it's a matter of kind of going through it and going, okay, this character sucks. This character's awesome. This character is pretty good, but could use some updating in his costume. It's not super cool.
Hmm.
So a lot of the characters that ended up being in the book were just characters that I had as a little kid. So
Wow.
like Dart was a little kid character, and Cordis was a little kid character, and Super Patriot started off as a really crappy Captain America knockoff who I kept changing his name all the time when I was a little kid. So various characters like that were I I thought I could salvage the deadly duo, Kill Cat and the Kid Avenger, those roles. And then there are other characters that I just, make up some new guys. Let's get
Hmm.
some new characters going here. Let's get that going up. Um, and then the cool thing about that is that you end up, just because you're taking characters from so many years, such a huge span,
Hmm.
is that you end up that there's a different sensibility to the way those characters are designed.
Hmm.
A fifth grader comes up with a really different character costume than a person who's, in his late 20s. So because of that, I kind of it didn't, like when the new 52 came about and all the characters looked like they shopped at the same costume store.
Yeah. Yeah.
I didn't want, it's like, hey, we all like the same collar. Isn't that cool? So I wanted there to be a real sense that, this character comes from this kind of world. And so he's dressing in essentially tights. And then this guy, the more modern character is going to be like, oh, they got a leather jacket on, and they're really just an ugly piece of crap of a dude, but his clothes are functional rather
Hmm.
than I'm got a uniform sort of thing.
Well, that's kind of the thing about, well, I always found about Image. It always felt more lived in, like the characters, depending what book you're reading, obviously, and everything about it. It felt more like a little bit of a down and dirty kind of version of the comics that we had seen before, and a little more realistic in that way,
Yeah.
which is something I've always like sort of appreciated by it when it came out. When you got to Marvel, did you begin right with working on, was it Spider-Man? Was that one of the first books you worked on?
Um, the very, very first thing I did was a Hulk versus Thor story that ended up in Thor 385.
Okay.
Um, but that was plotted a couple of years before it saw print, plotted and drawn.
Okay.
So me and Jim Shooter plotted it at a convention, and then I drew it, and then it was just an inventory job. So I didn't even know that those existed when I drew it. I didn't know there was such a thing,
So you just
but it
ran
was
into Jim
perfect. So
Shooter at a
yeah,
convention. He's like, here's the plot, draw this.
it was. I showed him my stuff, and he says, "Oh, you're a professional now." And I said, "Yes." He said, "How would you like to do something for Marvel Fanfare?" And I said, "Great, let's plot it during the convention." And he's like, "All right." So we sat down and plotted out the
Wow.
story. I had suggested I want, Hulk versus Thor. They never have a definitive ending to their story. You know, what, how, well, let's come up with a story where there's a real, this is the real winner.
Hmm.
Um, And then he gave me kind of the points where it needed to turn,
Mm.
which was just a couple little things where, things are going this way, the Hulk does this, that goes this way. And then the rest of it was really left up to me. You could probably put the plot on a post-it stamp. I mean, it was really, really very basic. Hulk meets Thor. Thor has a hammer, hits him with a hammer. Hulk picks up a girl and says, I've got a hammer of my own. And he says, Hulk says, you get rid of your hammer and I'll get rid of mine. And so Thor hucks his hammer away. Hulk tosses it aside. The two of them kick the crap out of each other. And the end of the story, uh, Thor stumbles on it. Thor's just getting his clock clean.
Mm.
And then at the end of it, Thor sees his hammer that's sitting there on the ground. And it's kind of like, yeah, I can beat this guy without my hammer. So he lunges towards it. And the Hulk's like, I won. I had to get your hammer. I'm the winner. He's all celebratory. And Thor's all like, God. Uh, but it ended up being scripted by Stan Lee, and Stan scripted it in such a way, and there was some redrawing so that there was no definitive winner.
Yeah,
And it's like,
I was
well,
gonna say, I'm surprised that they would let you give it to a
solved
definitive winner.
nothing.
Yeah. I was going to say, I'm quite surprised they would allow you to do that, because it always seems like every one of those, especially back in the day, those sort of team ups or verses never resulted in a true finish.
Yeah. And it didn't by the time it's up. Right?
That's why reading I remember when they came out with the Marvel versus DC book, and I remember like even then just watching them tiptoe around making anybody really lose to anybody else, because it was, no side wanted to admit that their hero was less strong than the other hero from the other side. That was one of the most creative tiptoeings I've ever seen. But so coming on, so you took over for Todd McFarlane on Spider-Man.
The whole thing of, I did my Thor story, and then that gave me great samples that I could show to everybody.
Yeah.
I showed it to a bunch of different people. I showed it to somebody at DC, Mike Gold, and he was like, love it. I want to get you work. I want to get a book for you. He was the guy in my corner.
Oh, nice.
And then I showed it to Mark Evanier, who was doing the DNA Agents over at Eclipse. He was looking for somebody to take that book over. So I did that for him. And then I was doing DNA Agents, and I got a call from Jim Salicrup. They needed somebody to do a fill-in on Spider-Man. So I did a fill-in on Spider-Man. And this is before Todd ever got on the book.
Okay.
And then so I did one issue there. And then, Mike Gold was just so persistent on, let me get you on something. He wanted me on Teen Titans, but I don't think Marv was having it.
Oh, really?
I ended up doing one issue that Paul Levitz wrote. I did 2 issues of Teen Titans Spotlight. I did a Secret Origin of Nightwing. And then I was skipping around. I did an issue of Adventures of Superman. I did 2.5 issues of The Outsiders. It's just kind of everywhere. And then they were like, we got a book called Doom Patrol. We have a book called Suicide Squad. And they thought, let's do an inventory story for those books. So we'll do Doom Patrol versus Suicide Squad, with the idea that they could run it in both books and have it continue from one book into the other, or they could put both halves in either one of those books if they're running late. And they ended up putting it out as a one-shot special, but that was the idea anyway. And then my next thing was the Doom Patrol. So I did Doom Patrol for about a year, and then Marvel came calling.
Who was writing it when you had done Doom Patrol?
Paul Kupperberg was writing it.
Right.
So
Okay.
I was before it became cool.
I was going to say that was just before Morrison took over,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Yeah. Wow. Oh, wow.
yeah. So we introduced Dorothy Spinner, who ended up being in the Morrison stuff quite a
Yeah.
bit,
Big part of that. Yeah.
and was in the TV show, I guess,
Yeah,
somewhat.
I got to watch that. I've been
So
meaning to.
that was me to a degree.
Oh, that's
And then
awesome.
and I did the Punisher, and then from there I did an Excalibur serial in Marvel Comics Presents, and then it was Spider-Man.
You know, was there any kind of like, I guess, pressure on yourself to take over? Because I know McFarlane was fairly popular at the time doing the book. Did you feel like coming into
Uh,
it after him, or?
yeah, well, when I took over the Doom Patrol and followed Steve Lytle, I was really in the screw that guy. I want to do it the way I want to do it.
Oh
I
yeah, yeah,
made
yeah.
no effort at all to ease the transition. So you
Uh,
go from one issue to the next, and suddenly, one of the characters puts on 40 pounds between issues, and suddenly, Robot Man's got this big, crazy jaw, and I was just doing whatever the hell I felt like doing.
is that like proper form in comics? Like if you're taking over for another artist like that to try to shift it or try to ape it a little bit into your own style? Like I've never really
Uh,
came across that
at the
before.
time, it was more common
Oh,
to do that sort of to
okay.
try and ease into it a
Hmm.
little. And I definitely, when I got on Spider-Man regularly, I was like, all right, I know better now. Because the fans were just like, they weren't having it when I took
Yeah.
over on the Doom Patrol. They're like, holy crap, this is way too different. It was sort of like when, I mean, not to equate me with somebody who's super, super talented, but when Bill Sienkiewicz took over New Mutants,
Mhm.
it was so different from what Sal Buscema had been doing that fans were just like, no, no. There were some people who were like, oh, this is awesome. But there were a bunch of people who were like, I'm not having it.
Yeah. Well, that's the
And
benefit of
so,
time, right?
that was what went on with Doom Patrol. So when I took over Spider-Man, I was like, I'm going to do what John Romita Jr. did when he followed Paul Smith on the X-Men. I'm just going to ease my way in here and, ape him on the first issue, and then kind of slowly but surely drop the McFarlaneisms as I go along.
That's funny because like it's interesting because I remember as a kid, when you weren't paying as much attention to detail. I was reading the comic and I remember noticing a different in art, but not thinking it was like a drastic change. So it worked. You did
Yeah,
it.
well,
But that Return of the Sinister Six storyline was like the one that I distinctly remember standing out in my head as being the one where I really noticed how cool all this stuff was and all that sort of stuff.
well,
So
it probably helped too that my sensibility is more towards what Todd does anyway. It's a
mm,
little more cartoony,
mhm,
whereas Steve Lytle was doing kind of somewhat more realistic with a lot more rendering and
mm,
stuff like that. He was more in the, I don't want to say Neil Adams school, but kind of
mhm.
at least more realistic than what I was doing at the time, which was really not.
Oh, I think it worked really cool for the book. Yeah, it was like I like how you're like, I'm going to ease into McFarlane, but maybe I won't draw 9,000 loops of webbing on every page either.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
he liked his webbing, that's for sure.
well,
Uh,
that was just kind of the way the webbing was.
yeah.
When I had done my fill-in before he came on the board, I was giving him that fat webbing back then.
Mm.
We both just kind of ripped it off from Michael Golden had done a Spider-Man thing. We were both like, yeah, that's cool.
That's cool.
If I ever draw it, I'm going to use that stuff. So since very few people had used the thicker webbing,
Mhm.
I think he got credit for inventing it, but he'll be the first to say, "Oh no, I got that from
Uh,
I got that from Michael Golden."
that's a pretty solid impression too. Cool. Yeah. Well, that was a pretty seminal run. I mean, the Revenge of the Sinister Six storyline was super cool, and then you did it. I mean, you brought Venom into a more like, because he'd really just been established in that issue 300, and then all of the further stuff was all when you were working on the book. Now,
Well, he came back before he'd been in the book twice before I
oh,
got
was he?
him.
Okay.
Yeah, he was around 300 and then around 316, 317, somewhere around there. He came back again. And then I don't know, it was like 332, 333 is when I had him show up.
Hmm.
Geez, I don't remember. But he showed up twice during my run on the book because he was showing up. He was like an annual. He would show up once a year. Um, but yeah. I mean, I think if you look at the way Todd first drew him, the way he later drew him, it's like, let's just make this guy more monstrous.
Hmm.
And so I took his lead of, okay, I got to top what Todd was doing on him. And then it's like, so that the whole tongue thing started.
Yeah, well, you were the one who sort of introduced that, and that's also you
Yeah,
kind of
which was purely by accident,
really.
by the way. Yeah. But what had happened was Todd had done a trade paperback that collected a couple of all of his Venom stuff.
Hmm.
So there's this trade that was out there.
I
But
think I
already
have that
had it.
actually.
I already had the comics that he had done.
Hmm.
So he did this new cover for it, and Venom's got his mouth open, and you can see that he's got a tongue. And I didn't buy it, but my brain's looking at it going, oh, Todd's giving him a tongue now. I got to give him a bigger tongue. So for a while, I kept saying, oh, no, Todd gave him the tongue. I'm just following his lead. It wasn't until years later that I saw the book again and saw, oh, no, he just owns a tongue. He wasn't doing anything crazy with it at all.
Yeah,
It was
yeah,
just, there's this little red dot in there.
yeah.
And my brain had filled in all the details. Like, oh, I guess I did innovate after all. I had no idea.
Well, I like the that you mentioned talking about your characters and kind of having this with Robot Man and with the original Savage Dragon iteration about giving him the bigger jaw, because like you did that with like Venom had a much more crocodilian almost jaw
Yeah.
that came really down.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
got crazy. And there's no way that a human head could be in there at the same time. It's just like this doesn't work. There's
It
no
was
way
so cool
you
though.
guys could share a throat. And this doesn't.
It was almost like the you got my peanut butter and your chocolate kind of thing. Like somehow you kind of came around to the iteration of the character that was so iconic and became the Venom. It must be kind of surreal to see like where that character's become and gone, and where it stands in the.
Well, I don't see all of it too. So
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, I don't blame you. They're not
it's not like they gave me a subscription and I was like, oh, I get to see all this stuff.
not getting an invite to
A lot of
the.
these characters, I kind of feel like they're ex-girlfriends after I'm done with them, you know? So it's like, I don't want to see what goes on with my ex-girlfriend now that we're broken up. I don't want to see who she's dating. So like
That's a
when
great
I
way to put it.
stopped doing Spider-Man, I stopped reading Spider-Man, and I didn't really read any of them for a number of years until I felt like, all right, John Romita Jr. is doing some cool stuff. Let me check that out.
Oh yeah, as a kid I'd kind of fallen off. I wouldn't say like I gave up on them or anything. I still had the issues, but I never really bought them with any regularity until I was probably like a 15 or 16, and that's when Romita was Jr. was on it, and I went like just fell in love with him and got really back into it, and which has continued to this day. I don't buy as many single issues as I used to, but Spider-Man's will always be one I grab. That was cool. So you were with Marvel until the big Exodus, the Image Exodus, which what was that like? I guess I haven't talked to anyone that had been involved with Image in the early days like that. So like, was it just a matter of a group of you guys getting together saying like we're sick of creating stuff, we're not getting all enough for ownership of our own characters and all that sort of thing, and let's just go do our own thing?
It's kind of it's kind of vague as to how it all came together. 'Cause I think some of us were thinking, well, I think we're still going to do our Marvel stuff.
Oh, okay.
I wasn't necessarily thinking, okay, I'm never going to work for any of those guys ever again. I was like, I had Marvel had approved Nova, but as a miniseries, and I was supposed to do a Lobo miniseries over at DC. So I had these gigs that were just kind of sitting there waiting for me. And so it's like, well, I'll just do this Dragon. I'll do a mini series with Savage Dragon over at Image.
Hmm.
And I'm one of the founders of it, but let me just test the waters here. And then when it sold like a bajillion copies, I was like, or I could just keep going, whatever.
Well,
That's fine too.
was there anything from Marvel or DC saying like, what are you doing over there? Like, did they not care because you were on your own
No,
thing? Or?
it very much was a case of as soon as we did anything, they kind of took it as uh, these guys are against us,
No.
and then they fought us real hard early on. They were like sending Todd McFarlane a cease and desist about using skulls on Spawn, and I had done a dragon-like character in a Marvel Comics Presents story, so they were saying, "Hey, we own this guy. You can't use him." Um, and they were and so they were noticing a bunch of things like that early on and getting in our face about it. And then they backed off after a while. I think they noticed, oh, this isn't making us any friends anywhere.
Yeah, I'd
But
say not.
it was kind of a weird, sticky situation. I don't think any of us were really like, we hate you now. It
Mm.
was more, hey, we want to do something on our own, and we've seen how people are treated when they do stuff with you. So we're not going to do that. We don't want you to own our stuff, and we don't
Yeah.
want you to own our trademarks. Um, and we'd had a conversation with Malibu where we had kind of beat them up on uh, what the split would be. And it was like, I mean, it was a 90-10 split
Oh,
where we
wow.
were getting 90% and they were getting 10. But they're looking at it going, these will be the biggest selling comics that we've ever published
Mm.
by a wide margin because they were just doing small black and white
Right.
comics up until that point. So when we came along, it's like, oh, you mean we can all buy houses? Awesome.
Yeah, I think like comic fans sort of mythologize, some of these stories that we hear without knowing the whole story or getting all the details from those who were there at the time. But that I don't know if it was like Wizard Magazine or if it was something else, but I feel like at the time it really felt like it was like these are the rock stars of comics, right? That are
Yeah.
like, and I
Well,
think there's even pictures of you guys on leather jackets and stuff like
the
Wizard
thing is,
Magazine.
it became something because of the way other people reacted to
Exactly, yeah.
the situation, that we weren't necessarily saying, hey, screw you guys.
Mhm.
But when their reaction was, uh, we got to cut these guys off the comp list immediately, and we got to, just they took it as it's us versus them
Yeah.
immediately. So it became like, oh, okay, well, I guess I am with these guys. I thought I was doing stuff with you, but oh, never mind. Um, but I think Rob was thinking he was going to have Marat do work over his thumbnails and continue on X Force.
Hmm.
And I think Valentino was kind of thinking maybe he'd be able to continue to do some Guardians of the Galaxy at the same time. But yeah, as soon as the ball was rolling and as soon as the checks started showing up, I was like, oh, okay, this is a viable thing. We
Yeah.
can make a go of this. Let's make a go of this.
Oh, that's awesome. And I mean, you're one of the few creators that I believe still works on the book that you started with Image, right? Because who?
Yeah, yeah. I was kind of thinking maybe I should do something else because I half promised myself if I ever started doing the Dragon as a regular book, I'm never going to stop for the rest of my career. And it's like, I don't know. I want the rest of my career to start now at age
Hmm.
29. But, there you go.
Yeah, that's cool. So in the height of the popularity of you guys Image and all these books rolling out and stuff, uh, Savage Dragon got his own cartoon series. I wanted to ask you about what that process was like because I remember
Uh,
catching it when it was on TV and enjoying it.
yeah,
But it didn't see. I don't know how long of a run it had. Maybe a season or two, was it?
it's 2 seasons.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's 26 episodes. Um, we had initially pitched it. I was represented by somebody over at CAA, and it was pitched to CBS, I believe, and they also pitched Freak Force. So I had
Oh.
two shows being pitched at the
Oh
same
wow.
time. Uh, and CBS passed on it, both, and they went with Wildcats instead.
Oh yeah.
And
Well, I guess at least uh,
Wildcats lasted a season.
yeah.
So, and then uh, somehow or other, the people who were involved in making it changed hands, and it ended up being a different group of folks. And I don't even remember what the hell happened there, but it did end up ultimately over on the USA Network, and it was a big success for them, but they couldn't build a block around it. They
No.
had three other shows, and those things didn't do particularly well. So the second season, they kept Savage Dragon going, and they replaced all three of the other shows. And then, I don't think those did particularly well. But it was, and then but I think they decided after that, the two different companies that co-owned the USA Network had signed some agreement that neither of them would open a competing network, and then one of them decided, we'll do it anyway, and then they were suing the crap out of each other,
Uh,
and the what ended up happening is anything that was in production they just shut down, and they took on some stuff that had been canceled elsewhere, so it seemed like they were still making new stuff, but they really weren't. And then Dragon ended up being a victim of that. Savage Dragon.
did you have much to do with do you have much to say with how the show was presented or anything about its
To a
direction?
degree, I was consulting to some. I did not have final say on anything.
Mm.
Um, and but so I, like the character design, we would go back and forth on stuff. They would send me drawings, and I would redraw things and send them back. So there's a fair amount of that. Most of the characters were pulled out of my comics. If there needed to be somebody new that was created, most often I would do a sketch for that character, and they ended up, using my stuff for much of it. Um, and occasionally there'd be something that somebody else came up with that I would end up drawing, but whatever. Uh, they'd send through the scripts, and then I would mark them up, and they would rewrite it, and then those would get marked up, and they would rewrite that. And at first it was, you're on board, and you're just like, oh, I'm reading this, I'm marking it up, off it goes, and then pretty soon you're sitting there going, I just got sent six scripts this week. It's the second version of this, the third version of this, the first version of this. And it just eventually I was like, screw it. I'm not reading this. I get comics to draw. So there ended up being some stuff in the cartoon that was like, that's not right. What the hell?
Yeah.
Should be
Well,
more
probably hard to
attention.
keep on top of it when you're trying to actually create work on the source material, the book
Yeah.
as well, right?
Yeah. And
Uh,
it's same thing goes on even today when Dragon guest stars in somebody else's comic.
mm.
He'll show up and I'll be like, what? He doesn't have scales. What's wrong with you? Like,
Well, there seemed to be a time period where he popped up as in cameos in a lot of books. I
yeah,
remember when Image had gotten the rights to the Turtles comics for that brief little period, and I remember reading those, and
that was me. That was me.
that was
That
awesome.
happened because of they that was I had a friend named Michael Dooney who had self-published his own weird comic a million years ago, and I
Mhm.
had self-published my own. So we met each other as kind of pen pals, and we had talked off and on about, oh, we should do something together one day. And then when Image Comics came around, he was working at Mirage. He had done some Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles before. So I contacted him and said, hey, let's do a crossover. So they did a special that Michael Dooney did.
Mhm.
And then I just had him in the regular issue of the Dragon or Savage Dragon. God, I
Mhm.
need to work
It's all
that.
it's all good. Hey, come on, you got your branding down, Eric.
I know. I do that all the time. I always
Yeah.
call it because the character's name is Dragon, but the book's
Yeah.
name is Savage Dragon.
You imagine how clunky the dialogue would be if he had to be referred to as the Savage
Hey,
Dragon every single
Savage
time
Dragon,
someone
how's it going,
talked to him.
Savage Dragon?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You want to get lunch, Savage Dragon?
You're my favorite guy, Savage Dragon. Sure, all right.
It's like a Tommy
Um,
Wiseau movie or something. It's fantastic.
so what happened, what ended up happening there is when Mirage decided, okay, we don't want to continue publishing anymore. They contacted me and said a bunch of different people have been pitching us on taking over Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. We'd like you to do it. And I hadn't pitched at all, but
Wow.
they didn't like what I had done when he appeared in Savage Dragon. So I put together a book and we published it for a couple of years.
Yeah, no, it was a cool book. And I always remember it was like such a dark, different. Well, I mean, the Turtles
Yeah,
when they started were pretty
it
dark.
was pretty different.
Well, when they started Mirage, they were dark. I mean, most people equate them
Yeah.
to the cartoon.
Yeah, but we blew them up like
Oh,
crazy.
yeah. I remember when Donatello was like one of them was a robot, and
Yeah,
like,
it was like
Raphael was
robot.
Shredder. Like I
It's like,
remember.
all these guys look too much alike. Let's do something to fuck them up. So we don't-
That's awesome.
that was my whole thing coming into that.
It's refreshing to hear people that work on these books talk like this because that's kind of what you assume it's like. You're just like, I talked to Mike Carlin a little while ago, and he was just talking about like the Death of Superman storyline and how it just came about because one of the guys in the back is just like, oh, let's just fucking kill him, whatever. And then he's like, okay, what does that look like? And then that's how it came about.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
like,
yeah.
I love the idea of that. It's just like,
Yeah.
well, fuck it, they're different. Make this one a robot. Who cares? You know.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's the way a lot of this stuff does. I mean, I know that fans really get this in their head that you methodically plan things out for years and years and years.
Mm-hmm.
And with the reality is you just kind of wing it.
Mm-hmm.
And then you've got kind of vague ideas of where you think this might go.
To me, that's more impressive because
sometimes it pays off and sometimes it don't. But I mean, all of us are winging our lives it's like
Yeah.
I'm gonna roll my dice on this woman and marry her and see how that And it's
That's
like,
true.
holy crap. It's like, what if we brought a couple kids into the picture?
Yeah.
And it's like there's no undo button, man. What
Yeah.
do you do?
No, I love that. It makes perfect sense. It's really like,
So
and that's
it's like there's no reason that your entertainment it wouldn't be the same way where you're just but people want this idea that it's all scripted ahead of time and there's this master plan. It's like no. My character has goals, wants and goals, just like everybody has wants and goals. I'm going towards this thing that I want to be someday.
Mhm.
But that doesn't mean that I know what's going to be going on 20 years down the road at all.
Yeah.
Because if I did, I'd be bored out of my mind.
Well, it's unrealistic to think that someone's has a 20-year plan or a 30, 40, 50-year plan for their character, like you have the story, you do the arc, whatever, move on to the next one and keep going. Like but you're right. People do mythologize that a lot. It feels like it's this, but to me, it's more interesting that way and also like more impressive because it's like, you're just kind of winging it all your way through to doing a series that lasts for, 20 years, 30 years.
Things that you should know if you're writing
For
a
sure.
mystery story, who did it.
Mm-hmm.
If you're coming in there just going, I'm just going to decide who the murderer is on the last page. It's like, I think you better have an idea, so at least your clues make sense.
Yeah, nothing's so worse when you watch like a TV show where they don't know the ending, and then when they get into this Lost or something, they get to like season 5, and you're like, "There's no fucking way they knew what this was going to be."
Really? I mean, those dinosaur sounds and mechanical noise.
The smoke
You're gonna
monster.
pay it off with what? No, I'm sorry. Your
One of my
smoke monster, I'm not buying that.
it's such a cop out. Like one of my favorite things to remind people of is that like on the DVD of the last season, there's like a special feature where like Ben's character just shows up and explains all the mysteries to some workers at a Dharma factory that never got answered on the show. They're just like, well, what about the polar bear? And he's like, well, this is where it came from. What about that? And he's like, he literally, it's like a half an hour coda where he's just like, here's all the answers, you assholes, that you all demanded. Here, you finally get them. Here, buy the DVD. Oh man. Well, I see as well that you took over for a while, replacing Valentino as publisher for Image for a little bit. Um,
I did for a little while,
yeah.
and then that wore out its welcome. And
Was it just that like it was not a like you were happier to do the comics and not quite get focused on the business end of it as much?
yeah, pretty much. I it was it kind of was like he had a bunch of his roots are more in the alternative comics
Hmm.
field. And then mine were more in the mainstream stuff.
Hmm.
So his tendency was if we're going to bring stuff on board, let's bring these, little black and white guys on board and then, give them a shot at the big time. And what was happening is a lot of those comics would come out and then just fail. And so we were having all these comics that would start up and then just disappear and with leaving everything kind of hanging there. You're like, well, where does this go? It just ended abruptly. Um, so I was, and there were creators who had said, I'd like to I'd like to pitch a book, but I don't know. I don't know how to do that or who to approach.
Hmm.
And I had several people kind of say to me, you should be the publisher. I can talk to you. And I was like, all right, maybe I should have an at bat and see how that works.
Hmm.
Um, so I tried that for a while and tried to help some of those guys just who had books where I could go, okay, you've got a book. It's been going on in Image for a while, but your characters aren't designed super well. So let me see if I can help you with that, help you redesign some of your characters. Your logo is absolutely unreadable. Let me try and come up with a logo that's a little easier to read. In some cases, there were books that were approved that didn't necessarily have great titles. Let me throw around some better titles. Just be a little more
Yeah.
hands-on in terms of helping people be successful. Because
Mm.
ultimately, that's what you want. You want people to be successful at what they're doing.
Yeah.
And even Charles Schulz had to be talked into using the name Peanuts. It's like he bitched about it the whole 50 years he was doing this strip.
Cash
But
it, cash in
the strip
$1,000 checks.
lasted for 50 years, and maybe that name had something to do with it.
Yeah.
So
That's awesome. Well, I mean, it just shows that you have a love for like comics in general, and it's you want it all to be good. So, give it,
but I didn't think having guys come aboard just stink up the place and then go back to Marvel and DC was necessarily a recipe for success.
No, absolutely
So I
not.
thought, let's get a little more hands-on and talk this guy off the ledge so he's not doing a goddamn fishing comic. Do something that's maybe a little more commercial.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's funny. There's like lots of things from comics past that I always kind of wonder, you know, where the through line comes from some of these ideas or how they get through, or where these characters came from, and that sort of thing. So it's interesting. I get sometimes it feels like they just throw a lot of stuff at the wall. I was talking with someone about like oh, was it the New Universe comics back in the day with like Kickers Inc. and like those kind of characters? Like, what was that? Like who's like we need to make a sports team of football players.
Uh,
That's a comic that people are gonna want
well,
to read.
that whole New Universe
Yeah,
line was such a weird thing to
it
begin with.
was.
But it was like comics are getting more and more realistic. let's do the next step and do a real comic set in the real world. And these are going to be more based in, so it's supposed to be one step more realistic. And they
Mm.
wanted everybody to be referencing guns instead of making up guns. And when you draw a car, it should be a real car, not a made up car, and all that kind of nonsense.
Yeah,
That
that's what I look
was
for in my
too bad.
comics is realism.
Yeah, it didn't fly. I don't think any of those books, they just weren't that good.
Yes, just moving along, I guess we're catching up to where you are current day. What was finishing up Alan Moore Supreme? How did that come about?
Um, that came about with Rob wanting to do a bunch of his books and looking for different guys to work on his books. And they were kicking around, and I was in the room with these guys
Hmm.
and, talking about Supreme and and I was like, well, here's what I would do. And I just off the cuff, like, the problem I have with Supreme is Alan Moore's Supreme is so different
Hmm.
from Rob Liefeld's Supreme that they might as well be two different guys.
Hmm.
So what if you did a story where it was revealed that Rob Liefeld's Supreme has been chained up in a room somewhere forever and is a different guy? Is literally, you've already established that Alan Moore established this whole multiverse
Yep.
thing. There's different versions of all the Supremes. So what if you just released Rob's Mean Supreme and had him come out and do his deal? So that was, and they were like, "What are you gonna do?" Uh, I didn't think I was gonna do it. I just thought that as an idea, that would be kind of a cool idea. So I gave it. I'll do 6 issues and then punt it to the next guy.
Yeah.
Was what I
No,
was thinking.
it was
And I
cool.
did do 6 issues, and then I set up all this crap like, here, take it, and then nobody ever followed me up on it. So
Yeah, I was gonna ask you about that as well. Do you have like a relationship with Alan Moore? I know he did work with Image, obviously with the
uh not
1963.
much. We talked on the phone once because early on I was like, why don't I'll just wrap up 1963. If nobody else will do it, let me give him a call. And he had a falling out with one of the artists
Hmm.
at one point. I don't remember if it was Beach or Bissett, but he had a falling out with one of them. And he just was like, I wash my hands of this. I don't want to own these characters. You can have them.
Wow.
Just take them by. And so his conversation with me is, I don't own that stuff anymore. I don't want to have anything to do with it. And those guys want to do something with it. That's up to them. But I'm
Yeah,
in.
he's an interesting cat, man. I tell you, just like the level of how quickly he is to wash his hands and be like, you know, go ahead. It's
Yeah.
yeah, maybe it comes with
Well,
age and it's not worth the fight,
can
but
totally feel that,
yeah.
you know. And I've been in situations too where you want to do something now. Like,
Mm,
oh, if I can get approved to do a Wonder Woman story today, I'll give you an awesome Wonder Woman story. If I have to go through contract negotiations and all that horseshit in order to finally be able to do my Wonder Woman story, I will have no enthusiasm for it, but by that time.
yeah.
But today, it would be great. And that's the problem with all these, company owned characters is you don't get it today. It's gonna be a while.
Yeah. Well, that and like it seems like the industry's really shifted in a way that like everything's up for grabs now, right? As far as like movies, TV shows, Netflix series, is whatever. Like every single, like obviously quite a bit of success with Images Invincible, and they're obviously Walking Dead. But like it just seems like all of these things are up for grabs now. Like everything that was anything could be something again because of this
Yeah,
sort of stuff. So it's just sort of it's like the Wild West out there. Just any property that possibly could be something. There's shows that are get runs that I never expect to see as TV shows. It's cool, but it's
yeah,
just
yeah. Well, it just takes somebody who cares
Yeah.
and who can see something in it and go, oh, I could totally make something out of that.
Yeah.
And then you're contacting the person and making it happen,
Well, like
you know?
anything, I always say comics are an easy because it's kind of like, when you write a Bible for a series to bring to a TV network, a comic is way easy. You can just go, here's the comic, this is what the show
Yeah, it
will be.
looks like this. It looks
Yeah.
something like
Yeah.
this. Just cast some big dude. He can look like that.
Yeah. Like
Oh,
the fact Sweet Tooth is a Netflix show, I was like, it's awesome, but it's just like,
yeah,
yeah, it's cool.
why not? It's right there. Look
Yeah.
like this.
What about this? Cool. So what's on the future for you? I know you're working on the ant character. How did that come about, by the way? You purchased somebody else's character,
Yeah,
Mario's.
that was a weird thing.
Yeah.
Um, oh, God, now I got to get that story straight. It's like Mario is I kind of talked me into doing the book at Image to begin with,
Hmm.
and then he was a weird comic when he was publishing over wherever the hell he was publishing
Hmm.
initially. He had done a mini series elsewhere, and he wanted to take it to Image. But the story was this little kid who um, dreamt of being a superhero, and she would write her adventures of being a superhero in her diary.
Hmm.
And but the day by day stuff was she's a little kid getting tormented by bullies and having trouble in school, and then her dad had whatever problem he was having. So it was just this little kid, and he wanted to bring it over to Image. And I was saying, well, the problem is your character can't meet any of our characters because it's a little kid and
Hmm.
her adventures are in a diary.
Hmm.
They can't, there can be no crossovers with that because your character doesn't exist in your own world. So I had this long conversation with him about how we could flip the switch there, flip the script, and just go, all right, we'll make it so it's set now, modern times. Your character is a superhero, and now we keep having flashbacks to when she was a little kid being tormented and stuff like that. So you can still do both ends of what you wanted to do, but it'll be from a different point of view. Because right now, when your superhero is imperiled, there's no
Yeah,
risk.
it's a story.
Nothing can happen.
Yeah.
Oh, she's going to get eaten by a giant bug. No, she's not. You can, scribble that page out in your diary and do something else. No problem, And so now the only problem would be, okay, well, we know that your character grows up to become adult Ant.
Hmm.
So any of the torment she goes through as a kid, we understand that she survives that.
Hmm.
Um, but now when she meets Spawn, that's Spawn, and she meets Dragon, that's really Dragon.
That's
Um, and so he started the comic, great guns to begin with, slowed down, slowed down, slowed down. Then he went off and was like, I got to do some stuff at Marvel so that I can get famous, and then people will come running for the great taste of man. And and then it just kind of ground to a halt. And I was like, well, can we wrap up what you've got? You've kind of left it hanging.
hmm.
And so he said, well, I've got 7 pages in, but I can't possibly wrap it up, in the remaining pages. It can't be done. So I'm like, well, send me the 7, 8 pages, whatever you got, and let me see what I can come up with. So he sends it to me, and I go, all right, here's what you do. And I sat down and I drew the thing like I did layouts for him.
Hmm.
Just do this. You can keep the 7 pages you've already got done.
Hmm.
Here's the pages that wrap that up. You're off to your races. Awesome. Great. I'll do it. Time passes. More time passes. He drew kind of one page, but changed it so much that it was really way, way different. More time passes. then it was, I don't have those 7 pages anymore. And I had a falling out with the writer who was writing the book for me.
Oh,
And I
jeez.
can't use the character that was in those first 7 pages anyway. So that character can't show up. Is there any way I could get you to do 7 pages that bridge from my other old story to the story you laid out?
Mm.
All right. Let me do that. Lay those out for him. And then again, time passes,
Mm.
and then he ran into some financial problems or whatever, but it's clear that he wasn't going to get Ant going because
Mm.
it just wasn't really happening. But so at some point he decided I need to sell this character just to survive,
Mm.
and I'm not making any money doing it anyway. So I had given him an offer on the character, but he contacted me and said, I got somebody who wants to buy my character. This is how much money they're willing to buy my character for, but I'd rather sell it to you if you have any interest in buying the character. And I not even thought about it at all. So this is very much like the Turtles conversation that I had years earlier, where it's like I wasn't thinking of doing the Turtles, but you're coming at me and say, "Hey, you want to do the Turtles?" I
Yeah.
go, right. Um, so that's kind of where that was, where I may be getting things out of order because I do
Yeah.
that, but so he agreed we're going to sell it, and then he was gonna draw the issue based on my layouts, and was like, okay, I've gotten some money in my pocket now, and I'm so I can do this, and then he didn't get around to it. So it's like, all right, I've had this sitting here for a while. I've got these layouts for the whole comic. That's all I need to do is transfer these onto regular art boards and tighten them up a little bit, and I've
Hmm.
got a comic that's already drawn. So let me do that. And so I did. And I just published that as here's Ant number 12 that wraps up that story. And then it was, all right, well, I should probably do some more. But I just thought the old series, he had like 5 different writers over the course of 11 issues.
Yeah.
Everybody, when they would get on the book, they would be like, oh, what that last guy did, that was bullshit. Here's the real story. So,
Yeah.
and it's like you can't do that 5 different times during your series,
No,
you
no.
know.
Yeah.
And Mario was doing that too because he had done his first 4 issue story, and at the end of the 4th issue, it's like, oh, remember the first 3 issues of this book? Bullshit! It didn't happen at all.
It
Like,
was all a dream.
dude, what are you doing?
Yeah.
So, so I just decided, rather than I'm going to pick up where this series left 10 years ago,
No.
with this huge gap in publishing. It's like, let me just start it with a new issue 1 and
Oh, that's super
try
cool.
to make some sense of whatever you did.
I guess my final question to ask you, and I don't want to take all your time, is I noticed in the Savage Dragon comics you moved your character to Toronto. So do you have an affinity for Canada and some? I'm in Nova Scotia,
Oh,
and I'm some Canadian in Nova Scotia. So I'm curious as to why why Canada was something that needed to become a part of the Savage
it
Dragon.
was really just a situation where I didn't want to deal with politics in my book particularly, and
Oh, makes
I
sense.
had had different presidents be president over the years. And so it was this situation where it's like, oh, we just elected this complete piece of shit. What can I do in my book? So I just had him do, uh, we can't have any aliens in this world in the United States. So all aliens have to get out of Dodge. So it's like,
That's
all right,
awesome.
I
It's a
just
great
need
way
to
to keep
get him
a
out of the United States, period. and
Yeah.
then just put him up in Canada. And I had him there for 6 years, basically the whole time that Trump was in office. And then recently I just had him move to San Francisco. So
Oh,
I said, oh, this would be great. I'll move into my hometown, then reference will be easy. And then as soon as I moved him here, it was like, oh crap, this place is really hard to draw. So,
yeah. How many battles can happen on the Golden Gate Bridge, I guess, right?
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, every TV show, they make sure that the Golden Gate Bridge happens to be right there.
Mhm.
When you're actually in town,
Yeah.
you can't see it from anywhere very well.
Yeah.
So, it's like there's a park between us and the Golden Gate Bridge, so you can't see shit unless you're sitting there standing in the park. Um, so, that just you can't frame it so that all the cool stuff is there all the time. You
Yeah.
want to be able to go, can I do a cool shot where I can see the Golden Gate Bridge and the cable car? And it's like, not really. You can't quite make
No.
that. It doesn't really exist. You can kind of get a shot where you can see the Bay Bridge and the cable car, but
Mm.
that's not even a great shot. There's too many buildings in the way.
Well, I applaud your dedication to keeping it real. I mean, a lot of places for references don't seem to care too much, about that sort of stuff.
Yeah, well,
So,
I'll keep it real when it needs to be.
yeah,
Okay, we're at a specific place. Now it looks somewhat like that specific place, but if they're
awesome.
just walking down the street and you're just seeing bricks behind them, like
Mm.
that's not necessarily going to be the right bricks in the right order. I can't.
Yeah, yeah.
That's a little much.
What's next for you? What do you got coming down the
It's more of
pipeline?
the same. I just want to do this book until I'm freaking dead. It's basically
I think you might get your wish.
I'm working on issue 269 right now.
Mhm.
So, it's a pretty good start, I think.
No, that's awesome. I'm one thing I really do applaud. I mean, the book is so much fun. It's a blast. And the one thing I do love about it and applaud is the use of a lot of throwbacks to classic comics, but
Yeah.
done in a way that's just there's a real reverence you have for it. It's not just a goofy, you know, style. It's like you
Yeah,
actually
I,
you
I
can
like that. I certainly love all the old comics, and I like bringing all that stuff around again. Also, it's been fun setting the book in real time
Mhm.
because that's something that people have always talked about. Oh, wouldn't it be great if Spider-Man grew up with me and stuff like that? And you realize, oh, they can't do that because Spider-Man would be long dead, and we'd be on
Yeah,
Spider-Man 3 at this point.
yeah,
Any of those characters, like Robin, wouldn't how long of a window would Robin stay Robin before you
yeah.
have to swap in another,
Oh,
young kid?
it's like
And then you
anything.
can't have them all have the same origin story because that's ridiculous. So then you got all kinds of weird motives and all sorts of stuff, and you're running through a new Robin every 5 years. Like,
Yeah.
yeah,
Or
that's
just
not gonna,
do some big crisis event and restart continuity every 10 years,
yeah.
which,
Which, I mean, whenever they do those kinds of things, where they're like, hey, let's start it all over again, you're either retelling stories that people have read a million times
yes,
before,
which they do so much.
which, I mean, that's kind of what they've done, or you do something completely different and people are like, yeah, this sucks.
Yeah, I have to make that joke. I say comic fans are well, it's mostly when it comes to the movie adaptations or the TV adaptations of the properties we all love. It's like they're the worst to appease. It's either this is too
Yeah.
much like the book, it's not different enough, I hate it, or this is too different, it's not like the book, I hate it. You're
Yeah.
never going to make everyone happy. It doesn't
Well, they
matter.
were they lucked out by having it be Iron Man
Yeah.
because Iron Man has really no good stories.
No, I
There's
don't.
never
Yeah,
been like an awesome, there's some ones where the art's okay,
yeah. Well,
but
even
there
the
haven't
character
been there,
wasn't.
there haven't been a huge amount of like, oh, this villain's super cool And,
Yeah,
it's like,
yeah,
so if you reimagine one of their villains, it's gonna be cooler
yeah,
than what's in
yeah.
the comic.
Just make him the
It's
Big
just gonna be
Lebowski, and you're
like,
good.
because like Mandarin sucked in the comics. He's
Yeah.
just a dope. And what's his what's the guy with
Whiplash,
the whips? I don't even
Whiplash.
know what his name is. Yeah,
Yeah,
he sucked. He was like
yeah,
a terrible costume, terrible character.
yeah.
So it's like we're gonna reinvent this guy. It's like, oh thank God. And you'd be pissed off about that. Oh, that's way better than what we had.
Well, even the character wasn't quite as like, I think Robert Downey Jr.'s and I guess Favreau's script and stuff would probably because the character just became something that it never really was in the comics, but now it
Yeah,
always
yeah,
kind of was, he was never quite so pithy and jokey and all that
yeah.
stuff before, but
He
now
was
he is.
super. He was like Errol Flynn.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
yeah, no, he's not that dude at all.
yeah. Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Eric. It was a really pleasure talking with you, and I appreciate you being on the show.
Sure, it was a
Uh,
pleasure being here.
all right,
Thanks for
thanks.
having me, man.
Talk to you soon.
All right,
Bye bye.
bye bye.
There it is, my chat with Erik Larsen. A very great conversation with a very great comic book legend. And I was very excited to talk with him, and we had a great chat, and I hope you enjoyed it as well. Next week, we were talking to Fabrice Sapolsky, who is a comic writer, artist, letterer, used to run magazines in France, comic box, a lot of cool stuff that he's created and been a part of, most notably Spider-Man Noir. He's a co-creator of that for Marvel. Went on to work on many other projects for other companies and is now doing his own thing, publishing, editing, all that for his own company, which is also very cool. Great guy, very cool chat with that, and that's coming up in 1 week's time. So be sure to tune in then. And then the week after that, we have another guy who's made quite a splash in comics, Fred Van Lente. So, a lot of cool guests coming down the pipeline. And hopefully you're along for the ride as I am, having a great time. I'm going to keep this train a-rolling. But in the meantime, I hope you have a great week. Hope everything is okay with you and your loved ones. And I hope that you are living life to the fullest. And I'll see you next week. The Graphic Histories Podcast is a proud partner of the United Federation of Podcasts.